Hello there. This is just a brief video to expand on some of the topics that we have touched on recently regarding academic research articles, and just to give a bit of advice about how to approach tackling a research article, how to read it in as efficient a way as possible without getting bogged down with any unnecessary detail. Hopefully this will be useful for you. So I thought I would use the paper that we briefly referenced during week one, which I will attach somewhere around this video, and this was published in the Journal of Nutritional Epidemiology, and it is titled "Sweet Snacks Are Positively and Fruits and Vegetables Are Negatively Associated with Visceral, I was getting ahead of myself, or liver fat content in middle-aged men and women." Bit of a mouthful, I must say, but there we go. Perhaps a more succinct title is certainly what I would expect from you in your assessment. Nonetheless, this paper was published in 2019, I think, and it was published by Van Ekelen et al. And colleagues. Et al, for anyone who's wondering, we'll get to this when we come to referencing, but just means "and others," and is a abbreviation that we use when a report has more than two people who have contributed to it. Bonus tip here, the first name on the paper is usually the person that did all the work, and the last name is probably the person that owns the lab that this project was performed in, and the people in the middle probably didn't do as much as the first person. So you want to get your name on as first author, because that's what will come up when people search for the paper. Anyway, I digress. It's perhaps worth mentioning, because we didn't have time for this the other day, what a journal, an academic journal, actually is. So this came from the Journal of Nutritional Epidemiology. So again, a bit of a mouthful, but it's the Journal of Nutrition, and then it produces a sub group, if you like, of studies called nutritional epidemiology. So the Journal of Nutrition, and any other journal, you've got the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, you have some journals out there in biomechanics called Journal of Sport and Exercise Biomechanics, Clinical Biomechanics, and so on. These are essentially magazines, expensive magazines, which are populated with people's research articles, with the studies that they have published in them. So instead of being most magazines that you'd get off the shelf in, I don't know, wherever you get your magazines from, being populated with, I don't know, celebrity gossip and things like that, the articles in a academic journal are of more a scientific nature. So every publication that you get makes up a journal, and they usually come out monthly. So typically you don't have to buy the whole journal if you want to look at a particular study. Say you wanted to look at this one. Some of them are free to access, as you know. We've looked into how and where you can source your research articles from, but you can just apply for a single study. This can be costly, nonetheless. This is why you're lucky to be students, because most of them you should be able to get for free. So first and foremost, I wanted to start with this title, and just a bit of advice, really. So this title is one of the reasons I like this paper. Is we should understand most of what is in this content here. So sweet snacks are positively, and fruits and vegetables are negatively. So fruit and veg negative, sweet snacks positive, associated with visceral or liver fat content in middle-aged men and women. Now, science likes to use a lot of jargon, and this can sometimes bog you down. Certainly can me, especially when that's compounded by lots of abbreviations. The key here is to take your time and not feel like you have to learn an entire new language in order to understand science. Very often, very complex scientific terms, or seemingly complex scientific terms, have a very simplistic meaning. We just like to sound cleverer than what we sometimes are. So if you came across this and thought, yeah, no, I'm with this title so far, and oh, what's visceral? Oh, okay, what do we mean by that? My best advice to you, and this is going to sound lazy, but it really isn't. It's the most efficient way to do things. Google it, type in visceral fat, define, find out what it is, and you will find that this is adipose tissue that accumulates around the organs. What's adipose tissue? Again, same thing. You'll find out that it's just fat tissue. You could, of course, and I as we said before, we don't say you have to do things, you have to read certain texts, we just recommend, but someone once bought me a book called The Dictionary of Science, and it's by M.J. Clugston. What a name. Anyway, M.J. Clugston by Penguin Publishing, and it's got more or less every scientific term that I think I've ever seen, and a little abbreviation and a little explanation in there. You don't have to buy it. Of course, this was £10, but it's just really nice and really useful to have. It's one of those things that you see how thick it is, you see how much jargon there is in science, you can't remember all of it. So don't get bogged down with the content, with the language that's used. The more you read, the more you'll become familiar with it. But if you start to stress about, what does this mean, what does that mean, what does that mean, what does that mean, then you'll be fighting a battle on two fronts. You'll be trying to learn the content and the language. Take your time, don't worry. It will come naturally if you make the effort to find out what these terms mean. And what I would do is, once you've looked up what the term means, is write your own simplified explanation, perhaps on a post-it note or something, and put it around your monitor or something like that. That's what I used to do anyway. So that might be useful for you. So let's begin. How to read a research article as efficiently as possible. I have waffled for a long time, haven't I? Anyway, money's worth. Okay, after the title, you must have a title, of course. You don't necessarily need to put your name on your work when you submit. It's anonymized, but if you want to, you can do. Then I can address you directly, and I know who you are. It helps, but it's up to you. We come to a section in this paper called the abstract. I'm not expecting you to do an abstract, but if you want to, you can. This is very often the hardest part of a research article to write, and it contains all the same headings that you would, instead of introduction here, they've said background and objective, but this is just introduction and aim, essentially. They've just separated the two, but it's got all the same headings that you would expect to see in a research article. So these two count for an introduction, methodology, results, and a conclusion. we've condensed this into, I haven't checked the word count on this, but it's usually around 200 words. The journal itself, so in this case the Journal of Nutrition, will dictate how long the abstract should be. But the abstract is a brief summary of each section, so it's like a synopsis, it's like a taster. When you come across a research article that you can't access, you should be able to still read the abstract to get an idea of what's going on, but you won't get the full picture, as it were. So you put the key information in here, but still leave in, or leave out, I should say, some points, because of course you want people to buy your paper. Not that as authors of published research you actually get any money for it, but never mind. So it's up to you. If you wish to do an abstract, you can. This isn't something that I touched on in any detail in your How to Write a Research Article paper for that reason, but it's up to you. Very often it's the hardest thing to write. You'd be amazed how it's sometimes easier to write more words. It's easier to write when you have more words than when you have less. But it's just a summary of what went on. So this can be a good place to start when deciding, is this an appropriate paper for me? So let's pretend you had a report on the effects of nutrition on visceral fat. That's all. So, okay, here we've got the dependent, independent variables and the sample population. Sample population is the population that was used in the experiment, middle-aged men and women. So, obviously the title will be the first thing you read. Then if you think, okay, yep, that might be something that I want to include, I would definitely read the abstract to get an idea of what's going on. Now, these guys have gone rather heavy with their use of abbreviations. It's best not to use too many abbreviations. Abbreviations are there to usually save on word count, but too many of them can just be confusing and annoying. When using abbreviation, in this case visceral adipose tissue has been abbreviated to VAT, VAT, and hepatic, which refers to the liver, triglyceride, which is free fatty acid, content, so liver fat content, has been abbreviated to HTGC. Not the easiest abbreviation, but there have been worse. So visceral fat and hepatic triglyceride content are risk factors for cardiometabolic diseases. Okay. In this study, this contradicts what I've said to you, but still, you should not use any personal pronouns. No we's, he, she's, or I's. This should say the study aimed to investigate the association of dietary fat intake of the main food groups with visceral adipose tissue and hepatic triglyceride content in middle-aged men and women. You could have got that from the title, in fairness. They then explain the method and the results and the conclusion. So reading an abstract will give you a good overview of what's going on. Now, do not worry too much at this stage if in the method section you get bogged down by how the experiment was performed. So while most of us, I assume, will know what an MRI scanner is, you might not. And you might think, oh God, I'm then looking up what all this equipment is and what this means. That's where I would recommend easing off, unless it's absolutely necessary. As you progress through your degree, you will want to look these things up and understand what they are. But to begin with, it can bog you down. So unless it's essential, I would say if you didn't know what an MRI scanner is, then don't worry too much. Spectroscopy, again, same thing. You could take your time and look that up, but again, it's starting to bog us down, so don't worry. If you're genuinely interested, of course, please do. But I would say at this stage, your very first module of your first semester, don't get too bogged down in the methodology if you don't understand everything that was done. So the results are what we're interested in. A little tip here, and this is a little bit of a cheat, I must admit, but very often you can get a good summary of what the paper found in the conclusion or the last sentence or two in the conclusion. So this one isn't particularly helpful because it says prospective studies are needed to confirm these results. Okay, fair enough. But despite some variation in the strength of the associations between men and women, dietary intake of sweet snacks was positively associated with liver fat, I'm just abbreviating there, and fruit and veg intake were negatively associated with visceral and liver fat, triglyceride level anyway. And they're saying further studies are needed to confirm these results, basically. So they've got quite black and white results for a change. As I said, shades of grey, but in this case, okay, no, it's fairly clear and straightforward. Keywords is a small section that you don't necessarily need to have. I wouldn't, if you want to include it, fine, but I wouldn't worry too much at this stage, simply because it's not necessary, because keywords are there for the purpose of the journal, so they know where to place it within place your article within the journal, or place this article within the journal. It's a bit like, I try to think, YouTube videos. You can tag certain words with your video, so when people search for it, that video will come up. This is the same sort of thing. So seeing as you're not going to be publishing your paper, then you don't need to, but it's okay if you want to. Oh, one more word on abbreviations. If you do use an abbreviation, which, don't get me wrong, they can be helpful. I would definitely abbreviate visceral adipose tissue. Just don't go mad, don't use too many. The first time you use the term, you use it in full with the abbreviation in brackets here, and then from this point on you just use the abbreviation. You see, you've got VAT here, VAT here, value added tax, no, visceral adipose tissue, and so on. So that principle applies to the abstract and then the main text below. Okay? So the first time the term is used in the abstract, it is followed by its abbreviation, and from then on you use the abbreviation, and the same rule applies to the introduction and the rest of the article, basically, not just the introduction. So, what does the introduction give us? The introduction is really there, as I've put on the Brightspace page, to give the reader the background knowledge they need to understand the basic principles of this study. Why it was done, what's going on. It's basically, it's the background, it's the foundation information. Now, if you were going to read 10 papers on nutrition and visceral fat, you'll probably get a feel for this very early on. So you might want to read one or two introductions, and then after that think, well, it's basically just, they're all saying the same thing, and rephrasing it, and not prioritise this section after all. So this is a good place to start if you're not sure what the topic is about, or perhaps you're looking for some inspiration for topics to put in your report. But I wouldn't read every introduction of every paper, put it that way. Now, the methodology, where are we? Sorry, I've lost, here we are. Methodology has subheadings, so you see here study design and study population. As we've already discussed, the method section is the most variable section, and it's one that you don't want to get too bogged down in. So I would say if you've got the gist of what's going on in the method section from the abstract, then you can save yourself a lot of time by just skimming over the methods. Again, I say this to begin with. This is your first year, this is your first module. This will change as you go on. But to begin with, like I said, I'm just trying to be as help you get through your paper as efficiently as possible. So when and if you were to do let's say a master's degree, we were always told that the method section is the section you start on. I would say when reading, you either start, this is after you finish the abstract of course, with the introduction. If not, go to the results and make that your second or first point of call when reading a paper. Now, this might appear a little foreign at the moment, but rest assured we'll cover a lot of what's going on here. Excuse me, hang on, it's got a cough. There we go, all better. We won't cover what's going on in this specific paper, of course, but we will cover a lot of the general themes of how things are presented. The results section, of course, needs text and a presentation of the results. In this case, these guys have used a table. After the results, so these are this first table just represents the sample population and their demographics, basically. Just gives you some background information as to the people that were recruited under the study. And if we go down here, I think that's not, oh no, got another one. We've got two more tables that actually present the results of this paper. Now, this is where it can get somewhat repetitive when writing. You don't want to say word for word what is in a table when you're writing, but at the same time you need to provide a body of written text with the table in your results, and the same is true here. So I wouldn't read this section about the characteristics of the participants here, this opening paragraph from here all the way to here, so I think, well, is it necessarily that relevant? I'm a first year student, I just want to know what they found out, essentially. And to be fair, we've already got that from the title, so so I would, oh, table 5, well, there's even more, my god, there's more tables than I thought. Now, the discussion would be your next point of call. The discussion is there to explain to you what the results mean. So if you read the results section and think, I don't really get that, and you may well not at this stage. There's going to be some concepts and words in different research articles that you think, there is for all of us. Any academic would admit, hopefully, that they would read things in a paper, particularly if it's not in their area of speciality, and think, I don't really know what that means, and that's okay. So the discussion is here to tell you what it means, and that's the purpose of it. So the results section is worth reading because you want to know what they found out, of course, and should be prioritised. And then the discussion, and this will give you lots of inspiration for what to put in your report because they are discussing the results. In this case now, this is where I should point out, these guys are publishing a paper in a academic journal, these authors. You are trying to demonstrate that you can construct a academic research article yourselves. This is your first attempt. So the journal would set certain limitations, I suppose you could say, I'm trying to think of the right word, on where things can go. And clearly this study has produced a lot of results, and they've said, well, we don't know where to put it all, let's just cram it in with the discussion as well. Your results must be in your results section, not in the discussion. These guys have had to put their discussion in, their results in with the discussion because of just space limitations and issues therein. You will not do this. You need to have your results, your table of results, your bar graph, your whatever it is, in the results section. Sorry, this is becoming less about how to read an article and more about what to do in your report. But anyway, I digress. So the discussion section is an excellent place to start after you've read the results. Now, they finish with an acknowledgement. You definitely don't need to do this. They haven't set their conclusion as a separate section. They've just sort of tagged it on here at the end of the discussion. If you want to do that, that's fine with me. You will not get marked up or down either way. The discussion, the conclusion is really just again, almost like an abstract of what they found in the study. In conclusion, we found da-da-da-da-da. So in conclusion, in this population-based study in middle-aged men and women without contraindications, that's any negative health implications that could have affected the results, for an MRI, dietary intake of plant-based fats and oils and of fruits and vegetables was associated with a less visceral adipose tissue. Intake of sweets, as we know, was associated with more liver fat. So there we go. Larger studies, prospective studies, I'll explain what that means when we look at study design and how we actually test our hypotheses, could look into this further, basically. So it's kind of like a neat conclusion. So this can be useful for you, but it won't really tell you anything that isn't in the abstract. So it's up to you. So just to summarise then, because this has gone a lot longer than I planned it to, obviously the first thing you do is read the title, then the abstract. If the abstract you think, oh, okay, good, yeah, this is useful, I'm gonna get this article, then I would recommend going either to the introduction if you think, oh, I need a bit of background information here to get me started, or if you've read a few papers on the same subject, then consider skipping the introduction, going to the results and find out, okay, what did they do? And if you're a bit unclear about what they did, or what they found out, I should say, then go to the discussion. The discussion is an incredibly valuable section because, yes, visceral fat was altered by their dietary intake, but if you read in the discussion here, they'll tell you the reasons why, or at least the reasons they think this has occurred. So the discussion is a critical part of any journal article. So, and of your report indeed. But anyway, I don't want to get iron lines crossed again. So, again, apologies if I've waffled too much, but hopefully you found this somewhat useful. So, title, abstract, what do we say? Intro if necessary, results, discussion, and then methods is entirely up to you. But I wouldn't worry about it too much at this stage, because they'll be using advanced research techniques that perhaps will just lead you down rabbit holes. Now, this will change as you progress through your degree, remember. You will be expected to read the methods by your final year, so do bear that in mind. But anyway, I hope that's helpful for now, and keep up the good work.